Hello everybody and welcome back to Sewing with Taylor. If you keep up with me on social media, you will see that I just finished the Sid dress and I'm currently wearing it. It is a long dress, a great beginner pattern, and I will drop the link below so that you can check it out if you want to make one for yourself. It's got this very cute little ties here. You can also make it into a top and a vest. But that is not what we are talking about today. Today, I will be talking about 5 things I wish I knew before I started sewing, so that when you pick up your first pattern and get your first sewing machine, you have a little bit more of an idea of what to expect or not expect as you start your sewing journey. So let's go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about my background as a seamstress. I started sewing roughly 2017, 2018. I grew up with a mom who sews and makes beautiful, beautiful window treatments, and I never had any interest in sewing or textiles until I found a pile of fabric in my mom's garage that she was going to throw away because she didn't have any use for it, and I could not let that happen for whatever reason. And that kind of started what became my full-time job as a seamstress for the past 4-ish years before I closed my company. I started out making tote bags, and my mom taught me to sew on a $25 secondhand sewing machine, and I grew into my full industrial setup, which you may have seen in a previous video. I have since kind of downsized. At my peak, I had 4 industrial machines, 2 single needles, a serger, and then a safety stitch. And now I only have an industrial Juki DDL 5550, which I love, and then I use a tabletop serger at this point due to space. So let's go ahead and talk about things that, looking back, now that I've been in the profession for a little over 5 years, things that I didn't really know or was kind of surprised by as I got in deeper and deeper into being a seamstress. The first thing, and what I always start with in my sewing lessons, is that you need to know your machine. Understanding your machine, how it works, and feeling confident that you are in charge of your sewing machine does not run you, is so powerful. And frankly, the patterns and the actual making of things is not, in my opinion and in my experience, the hardest part. The hardest part is feeling confident, knowing that if your stitches look this way or that way, you know how to troubleshoot it, being able to replace needles, thread your machine confidently, and understanding your bobbin and your tension, your stitch length, all of those things. And that's really so valuable in sewing, because once you run into an issue, as you are bound to run into an issue with your machine, you are so quick and have the tools and the knowledge to be able to troubleshoot and just get back on track. And that level of confidence really kind of bleeds into actually making garments and making and reading patterns and making things that you want to make. So once you understand your machine, the rest is really kind of downhill from there. So I really suggest finding someone who can help you, or watching YouTube videos just to really understand how your machine works so that you know that you are in control in that situation. The second thing I wish I knew before I got into sewing, and more specifically garment making, is that most garments that you buy, even from the store versus ones that you make, their seams are not perfect. And it's really not about lining up so perfectly every seam. It's so hard to do. And most of the garments that you buy, you can usually look at the seam in the armpits or other locations where you would expect it to match up as a tee, and it's not exactly perfect, and that's okay. Any handmade product and any garment that's handmade is going to be very close and look very beautiful. This garment I made and spent many hours on, and there are places that it does not match up exactly perfectly, and that is so normal. The amount of times once I started understanding garment construction and looked at my Free People, my Anthropologie, and kind of turned it inside out and gave it a deeper look, I realized, wow, okay, there are a lot of spaces that are not lined up exactly perfectly, a lot of seams that aren't perfectly finished, and yet I paid $148 for that dress. So it's okay to not have that super high level of pressure on yourself to make sure every single thing is perfect in a garment. The main things to focus on are lining up as best you can your pieces, keeping things straight, and then of course finishing and encasing all of your edges, but giving yourself a little bit of grace, as making clothing is an art, and in any art there is room for error, and perfection is not what we are seeking. So giving yourself some space to really know that you are not a bad seamstress by any means. It is very, very normal of garment construction. The third thing I wish I knew before getting into sewing, I do a lot more math than I thought I would, and my husband will be the first to tell you that math is not my strong suit, but measurements and calculations are a very hefty part of garment making, especially if you are self-drafting any patterns. When you are choosing to use patterns that you purchase, a lot of times there is not that math done, or needing to be done on your end. It has been done previously by the pattern maker, but I was shocked by how often I needed to pull out my calculator, and I got very good at my measurements and things of that sort that I was not good at to begin with. And I was quite overwhelmed, but it was one of those things that the more I used the muscle, the better I got, but I was not prepared for that when it came up. The fourth thing I wish I knew before I started sewing is that I did not need a fancy machine to make good products. I started my business on a $25 secondhand machine. Like I mentioned before, it was just a standard tabletop, and I made products on there for a very long time before I switched over to an industrial machine. And I frankly switched to industrial machines because the rate in which I was sewing was full-time, and it was just so much quicker. And I did find an elevated stitch came with an elevated machine, but it was not necessary by any means, especially if you are sewing as a hobby and for fun and for yourself and your close friends. You can sew on any machine that you want to. It does not need to be expensive. It does not need to be super fancy. I will say fancier machines that do less do those things better, but that doesn't mean that a traditional sewing machine from Singer does not do an absolutely amazing job. Any machine that you choose to start with and that you use now is perfect, and it can 1000% get any job done of that of a fancier, higher quality-esque machine. But it is absolutely not necessary to buy anything super, super fancy, and really to buy anything new. You can easily find a sewing machine secondhand online. The fifth and final thing for today that I wish I knew before I started sewing, and specifically in garments, is that there is not one way to make a piece of clothing, a tote bag, a bucket hat, any of those things. There are so many different ways to hem things, to do different types of stitches, to do different different methods of gathering and just attaching a bodice to a skirt. There are different ways to construct your garment and to do bias tape on the necklines and the armholes. So if you see a way that one sewist does it and you don't feel like it clicks for you, makes a lot of sense, there are so many other ways, and it doesn't make any of them wrong. At the end of the day, they all make a garment. So for example, I followed an amazing tutorial by Sydney for this dress, but there were certain methods of attaching bias tape that she did that I found weren't how I do it, and it doesn't make any of them better or different. We ended with the exact same product. However, it's just sometimes certain methods click different with certain brains. And there's a lot of things I've come to just kind of trusting my intuition on when it comes to constructing a garment that I feel like are just a little different than other people, but they make sense in my brain. And so it doesn't matter how you get to the final product. It's whatever makes sense for you and makes you feel most comfortable and confident when you're sewing. If you have any tips that you feel are vital for people who are starting to sew, or questions that you have, feel free to drop them in the comments. Otherwise, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel to keep up with all of the new things that we will be posting. And by we, I mean I am coming out of business owning mindset in which it was always a we, but this channel in my new sewing adventures is an I thing for now. So next time, ideally, we will be making a bucket bag. If you haven't seen our video for our bucket hat, be sure to go back and check that out. However, I hope you guys have a beautiful Thursday, and I will see you next week.